Mafia boss came home early and burst into tears when he found the maid's toddler washing his clothes. Alessandro Moretti was 38 years old, and the city called him many things behind closed doors. Some called him the Wolf of the East River. Some called him the last king of the old families. His enemies simply called him by his surname and lowered their voices when they did. He owned a stone mansion on the hill above the harbor, 3 stories of gray granite behind wrought iron gates, and 12 security cameras that never blinked, and 12 bedrooms that no one occupied but him. His parents were buried in a family plot outside the city. His younger brother had died in a rival ambush 11 years ago. He had no wife, no children, no one who called him by his first name without fear tucked underneath the word. That afternoon, he came home earlier than expected. The meeting in New Jersey had ended before the coffee cooled. His counterpart, a shipping magnate who had spent 3 months resisting Alessandro's terms, had finally understood the shape of the room he was sitting in. Papers were signed, hands were shaken. Alessandro left without finishing his espresso. He did not call ahead. He did not want the staff scrambling to reset the schedule, pretending to be surprised. He wanted the quiet of his own hallway and nothing else. His driver dropped him at the service entrance, the same side door he had used as a boy to sneak back into the house past midnight, when his father was still alive and still angry. Old habits, he had learned, were the last things a man surrendered. The corridor inside was dim, lit only by a slant of pale afternoon light from the small window near the ceiling. He heard water running. That in itself was not unusual, but then he heard something else. A small voice humming a tune, soft and slow, the kind of old Italian lullaby his mother used to sing when he was very young, and the house had not yet become a fortress. He stopped walking. The laundry room door stood half open. Alessandro looked from the shadow of the hallway into the light. There, standing on a small wooden stool pushed up against the deep basin sink, was a little girl, Emma Rossi, 3 years old, the daughter of the housekeeper who lived in the cottage behind the garden. Her sleeves were rolled up past her elbows, soaked through to the shoulders anyway. Her small hands, red and raw from the cold water, were scrubbing at a white dress shirt, the Armani he had worn to the Bianchi dinner 3 nights ago, the one with the small coffee stain on the collar. Her tongue poked out slightly at the corner of her mouth in fierce concentration, the way small children do when they are trying with all their strength to do a job the right way. On the floor beside the stool sat a pile of his other clothes, more shirts, a pair of trousers she had clearly dragged from the dressing room because she could not lift them. Water had splashed everywhere. Her little dress was soaked through. Her dark curls clung to her forehead. Emma. The name came out of his mouth softer than he had meant it. She spun around so fast, the stool nearly slipped beneath her feet, and her eyes went enormous with the particular fear of a child who knew, already, that this was not the first time she had been caught. I sorry, Emma stammered, her small voice trembling like a leaf in cold air. Mama sick. Mama say not miss work. I wash shirt good, I promise. I careful very. She lifted the wet shirt toward him with both hands, holding it up the way a child holds up a drawing to a parent, waiting for praise. Water dripped from the fabric onto her small bare feet. The coffee stain, of course, was still there. She had scrubbed and scrubbed with all the strength her 3-year-old fists could summon, and the stain had not yielded, but she did not know that. In her mind, she had done her job. Alessandro lowered himself onto one knee, then the other, so that he was no longer towering above her. The stone floor was cold and wet through his suit trousers. He did not notice. "Where is your mother, Emma?" he asked, and his voice came out gentler than any voice he had used in years. She pointed a small wet finger toward the window, toward the small cottage behind the rose garden where Sophia Rossi had lived for the past 3 years. "Mama sleep," she said. "Mama say not wake her. I do wash. I big girl now." Alessandro's mind moved backward through the last 4 days. 4 days he had been gone, first to Philadelphia, then to New Jersey. 4 days no one had told him that Sophia was ill, not the head of the household staff, not the security detail, not the driver who saw the cottage light burning at odd hours. No one told the boss anything that might sound like a complaint, like an inconvenience, like a burden. That was the unspoken law of the house he had built. Emma tilted her head, waiting, her enormous brown eyes bright with hope so pure it cut straight through him. "I do good job?" she asked. Alessandro opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Inside his chest, something that had been locked shut since the morning his mother was shot dead on the kitchen floor of their old house in Little Italy, the morning he was 11 years old and eating cornflakes at the counter, that something cracked open. He did not decide to cry. It simply happened. The tears came fast and hot, and he pressed the back of his hand against his eyes, ashamed and unable to stop. Emma slid down off the stool. Her small bare feet slapped softly on the wet tile as she padded toward him. She reached up and placed her small soaked hand on his shoulder, right where the fabric of his jacket was darkest. "Ale sad," she whispered. "I sorry. I do bad job." And Alessandro Moretti, the man whose name made grown men lower their eyes, the wolf of the East River, the last king of the old families, knelt on the wet laundry room floor of his empty stone mansion and wept the way he had not wept since he was 11 years old, and had buried both his mother and his own boyhood in the same cold grave. Emma patted his shoulder again, slowly, steadily, the way her own mother had patted her back to sleep on nights when the world felt too big. "Mama say cry okay," she whispered against his sleeve. "Cry, let the sad come out." Alessandro drew a slow breath, wiped his face on the back of his sleeve the way he had not done since he was a boy, and pushed himself up from the wet tile. His knees ached from the cold. He reached down and took Emma's small wet hand in his own, and her fingers curled around two of his without hesitation, as if she had been holding his hand her whole life. "Let us go check on your mama," he said quietly. "And then I will find someone to help you both." Emma nodded with great seriousness, the way small children do when they have been given an important assignment. She walked beside him down the long hallway, her bare feet leaving small damp prints on the marble, her chin lifted as if she were leading a general to a battlefield. The cottage behind the rose garden was small but immaculate, arranged the way only Sophia could arrange a place. A single narrow bed against the far wall, an old wooden dresser passed down from her grandmother in Naples, a framed photograph of Emma as a newborn, wrapped in a yellow blanket, a soft cloth doll named Bella propped carefully against the pillow where Emma slept. Alessandro knocked softly on the doorframe before stepping in. Sophia lay beneath a thin blanket pulled up to her shoulders. Her face was pale. Dark circles pressed beneath her eyes, sweat gathered at her hairline. When she saw him standing in her doorway, she tried to push herself upright, and panic bloomed in her expression like a spilled ink stain. "Mr. Moretti, I am so sorry." Her voice was hoarse. "I know I should have called someone. I did not want to bother anyone. I only needed a day, maybe 2, and then I would have been back to work. I promise. Please do not, Sophia. Stop." His voice was firm, but not hard. He had spoken that softly to very few people in his life, and never to a woman lying in a sickbed. "You are ill. Why did you tell no one?" Sophia's eyes filled with tears, and they were not the tears of illness. They were the particular tears of a poor woman when illness threatens the single thin thread standing between her family and disaster, her work. He had seen those tears once before, on his own mother's face, and he had never forgotten them. "I did not want you to think I could not do the job," she whispered. "I told Emma to stay quiet, to let me sleep it off. I did not know she was washing my shirts." Sophia's face went white with horror. "Mr. Moretti, forgive me. She must have seen me do the wash before and thought." Alessandro lowered himself onto one knee beside the bed, the same way he had knelt on the wet tile only minutes ago, in the presence of another Rossi. "Sophia, I am not angry. I am the opposite of angry. Do you understand me? Your daughter is the kindest child I have ever met. She did nothing wrong. You did nothing wrong." He reached into his jacket and drew out his phone, already dialing. "I am calling my personal physician. He will be here in 20 minutes. Do not say a word about money. You will never again finish that sentence in this house." While they waited for the doctor, Alessandro sat down on the small wooden chair beside Sophia's bed. Emma climbed up onto his lap without asking, the way small children do when they have already decided that someone is safe. She was still damp from the laundry water, her curls dark against his shoulder, her small hands cold. Alessandro did not seem to notice or, if he noticed, did not care. He shrugged out of the $3,000 suit jacket he had worn to the New Jersey meeting, wrapped it carefully around her small shoulders, and held her against his chest until she stopped shivering. Sophia watched this scene through eyes heavy with fever and slow-falling tears. She could not quite believe what she was seeing. Alessandro Moretti, the man whose name emptied restaurants when he walked in, the man mothers whispered about behind closed doors when they wanted to frighten disobedient sons, that man was sitting in her tiny cottage in a suit worth more than her annual salary, cradling her daughter as if the child were the most precious thing in the world. "She talks about you," Sophia whispered, her voice rough from the fever. "All the time. Every time you leave for a trip, she waits by the window. She calls you her friend. I did not want to tell you. I thought you would be annoyed." Alessandro looked down at Emma, who had already drifted into sleep against his chest, her small fingers curled into the fabric of his shirt. Something warm was spreading through his ribcage, in the exact place where a cold stone had lived for as long as he could remember. I did not know, he said quietly. I am sorry I did not know. Dr. Marchetti arrived 19 minutes later, black bag in hand. The same physician who had stitched Alessandro closed after the ambush of 2015 and had never once written any of it down. He examined Sophia gently, listened to her lungs, took her temperature, felt the pulse at her throat. His diagnosis was quiet and definite. A bad case of influenza layered on top of pure exhaustion. He wrote a prescription, left 2 small bottles on the nightstand, and instructed her firmly to remain in bed for a full week. Sophia began to protest about her work. Alessandro cut her off before she could finish. Your work is done for the week, paid in full. Starting tomorrow, someone will bring meals to the cottage for both of you until you are strong again. There will be no argument. Sophia's eyes filled again, but these tears were of a different kind. They were the tears of a woman who had spent years believing herself invisible, learning in a single afternoon that someone, at last, had seen her. Alessandro rose carefully, cradling the sleeping Emma against his chest. He carried her out of the cottage, across the dark garden path, into the main house, and up the long staircase to the master bedroom. He laid her down in the center of the king-sized bed and pulled the cashmere blanket up to her chin. He stood there for a long moment in the warm yellow glow of the bedside lamp, watching her small chest rise and fall. She saved me, he thought. She does not know, but she saved me. The next morning, Alessandro called Marco before the sun had fully cleared the harbor. Marco was his financial advisor of 6 years, a lean, quiet man from Palermo who had never once questioned an order. That morning, he received 3 cancellations in a row. The flight to Miami, the dinner with the Bianchi family, which had taken 4 months to arrange, the private supper with the mayor. Marco was silent on the other end of the line for a long moment. Ale, he finally said, using the private name only 2 people in the world were still allowed to use. In 6 years I have never heard you cancel a single meeting. Is something wrong? Are we in trouble? Alessandro was standing at the tall kitchen window as he spoke. Outside the glass, in the breakfast nook, Emma sat perched on a high stool, her small legs swinging far above the floor. In her small hand, she gripped a butter knife twice the size of her own palm, and she was carefully, with fierce concentration, spreading peanut butter onto a slice of bread. Peanut butter was on her cheek. Peanut butter was in her curls. She did not seem to notice or mind. At the table beside her, Sophia sat wrapped in a soft gray shawl, still pale from the fever but strong enough now to sit upright. She was watching her daughter with a small, quiet smile she had not carried on her face in years. Nothing is wrong, Marco, Alessandro said. Something important has just happened. Reschedule everything for next week. Do not book anything new until I tell you. Is everything all right, boss? Alessandro looked once more into the kitchen. Emma had noticed him watching and lifted her sticky knife triumphantly in the air, as if presenting a masterpiece. Everything, he said slowly, is more than all right. He hung up. Over the following days he made arrangements he had never dreamed of making. He hired a private nurse to check on Sophia once each morning, over her stubborn protests. He ordered a proper play area installed in the glass sunroom that faced the eastern garden, a room the mansion had never needed before because no child had ever lived under this roof. Soft rugs, a small bookshelf, a basket of wooden blocks, a single stuffed lion, because Emma had pointed at a lion in a picture book and said, with great authority, "Brave one." He himself, a man who had once measured his hours in meetings closed and deals signed, began instead to measure them by how many times he could make a 3-year-old giggle at a badly told joke. It astonished him how easily Emma had folded herself into his life. It astonished him more, one afternoon when Sophia took her for a follow-up examination, how quickly the mansion emptied out again. He walked through the enormous silent hallways, past 12 unoccupied bedrooms, and understood for the first time exactly how alone he had been for exactly how long. His steps slowed near the piano in the main sitting room, the great black grand piano no one had played since his mother died. On its lid stood a dust-dulled silver frame, his parents on their wedding day, young and unafraid. He lifted a fingertip and drew a slow line through the dust. For the first time in many years, he did not turn his face away. A week later, Sophia was fully recovered. Alessandro decided to teach Emma how to bake cookies. It was a thing he had never done in his 38 years on Earth. He owned a mansion with a chef's kitchen worth more than most homes, and he had never once switched on the standing mixer. He read the directions on the flour bag twice, frowning as if it were a contract clause. Emma sat on the marble counter beside the bowl, her small legs swinging, offering solemn advice in her 3-year-old language. "More sugar," she declared. "That much?" Alessandro asked, tilting the cup. More, Emma repeated firmly. He added more. When he finally turned on the electric mixer without securing the paddle properly, a small storm of flour erupted from the bowl. It powdered his black shirt, his hair, his eyelashes. Emma shrieked with laughter, kicking her feet against the cabinet. Sophia appeared in the kitchen doorway, drawn by the sound. And for the first time in years, she laughed, truly laughed. Not the polite short laugh of the working woman, but a full laugh from the chest, the kind she had almost forgotten she was capable of. Alessandro heard that laugh and stopped stirring. He looked at her. The noon sun poured through the tall window and lit her face from the side, and he saw suddenly, with a small, clean shock, that she was beautiful in a way he had never allowed himself to notice. The beauty of a woman who had known real suffering and had refused to let it harden into bitterness. Emma yelled in dramatic outrage when the first tray of cookies came out burned black. All three of them laughed together. While the second tray baked, Emma climbed into Alessandro's lap in the sitting room. He read her a fairy tale, using the low voice that had made grown men lower their eyes. Only now the voice was playing a dragon, and then a princess, and then a very confused frog. Emma laughed until she hiccuped. Sophia sat nearby, folding a small pile of laundry. Her own this time, not the household's. At the sitting room door, Bruno, the old golden retriever, no one had paid attention to in 2 full years, lifted his gray muzzle. His tail thumped once, then again. He rose stiffly on his old hips and padded over. He lay down heavily across Emma's small feet, and she reached down with careful reverence and stroked his soft ear. Alessandro watched the scene and felt something so tender inside him that it was almost pain. For dinner, the three of them ate together, not at the enormous formal table in the dining hall, but at the small round table in the kitchen. Emma insisted that Alessandro feed her the first spoonful of pasta. Sophia began to protest, embarrassed, and Alessandro cut her off with a small smile. "Let me, I like feeding her." That evening, after Sophia carried a sleepy Emma back through the garden path, Alessandro walked alone into the eastern rose garden. 10 years it had stood abandoned, since the morning his mother died. He pulled his phone from his pocket and dialed the head gardener. "Replant the roses," he said quietly. "Plant more than there were before." Lorenzo De Luca was 45 years old and had stood at Alessandro's right hand for 15 of those years. It was Lorenzo who had found the boy Alessandro 2 weeks after the murder of his parents, a hollow-eyed 15-year-old sleeping on the fire escape of a shuttered pastry shop in Little Italy. It was Lorenzo who had put a first plate of hot food in front of him. It was Lorenzo who had, over the years that followed, taught him how to hold a gun, how to close a deal, how to walk into a room so that the men inside forgot how to breathe. He wore a gray suit tailored to the exact half-inch of his shoulders. On his left wrist, a heavy gold Rolex caught the light with every measured movement of his arm. His voice, when he spoke, was smooth as warm oil. His eyes, however, had always been cold. They were the color of river stones in winter, and they had watched more men die than Alessandro would ever know. That Thursday morning, Lorenzo arrived at the mansion for the weekly meeting. He walked in through the front entrance, as he always did, past the 2 security men who lowered their eyes. What he saw inside made him stop for exactly half a second before continuing his stride. Emma Rossi, the housekeeper's daughter, sat cross-legged on the sitting room rug, drawing on a large sheet of paper with crayons scattered around her small knees. Sophia was in the kitchen preparing lunch, and she was not wearing the black and white uniform she had worn every day for 3 years. She was wearing a soft, pale yellow dress patterned with tiny wildflowers, and Alessandro, seated at the counter with his sleeves rolled up, was laughing at something the child had said. Laughing, openly. Something Lorenzo had not seen on that face in over a decade. Throughout the meeting in the study, Lorenzo watched. Alessandro proposed reducing the family's arms trafficking, redirecting capital into legitimate real estate developments in Brooklyn and Queens. Lorenzo nodded, agreeable, expression untroubled. Inside, his mind was already moving through cold calculations. The boss was changing. The boss was softening. The boss had brought 2 outsiders into the fortress, something that had not happened since the day the elder Morettis were carried out in bags. For Lorenzo, softness was weakness. And weakness, in this world, was opportunity. Before leaving, Lorenzo stopped in the sitting room. He crouched down, careful of his tailored trouser knees, and offered Emma a smile as warm and heavy as honey. "You draw beautifully, little angel." Emma looked up at him. She did not smile back. By some instinct older than reason, she scooted backward across the rug until she was pressed against Sophia's leg, who had just walked in from the kitchen. Sophia placed a protective hand on her daughter's shoulder. Both women in this house disliked this man. Only Alessandro had not yet noticed. Lorenzo rose smoothly, adjusted his cuffs, and walked out. At the curb, seated inside his black BMW, he pulled out his phone. He dialed a single contact. His voice, when the other end picked up, was calm and low. "We need to talk. The boss has found a weakness." That night, Lorenzo drove himself to an abandoned warehouse in the industrial belt of Brooklyn, past chained lots and boarded windows, past the last street lamp that still bothered to burn. He parked the BMW in a shadow that had no name. Inside the warehouse, waiting for him beneath a single hanging bulb, sat Vincenzo Baroni. Barone was the head of the rival family the Morettis had bled against for 20 years. He was a heavy man in his late 50s, with a face like weathered marble and hands that had signed too many death warrants to remember any of them. 6 bodyguards stood around him, long rifles held loose but ready across their chests. The air smelled of wet concrete and old oil. Lorenzo walked in without slowing. He was not afraid. He had crossed to this side 8 months ago in a private room above a wine bar in Bay Ridge. Everything since then had been rehearsal. Tonight was performance. The negotiation was brief because both men had done this arithmetic before. If Lorenzo delivered Alessandro Moretti, Lorenzo would lead what remained of the Moretti organization under Baroni's protection. Territories would be split. Profits would be split. The old war would end because there would no longer be 2 families to wage it. "When can you move?" Baroni asked, tapping ash from a thin cigar. "The boss has found a weakness," Lorenzo said. "A 3-year-old girl and her mother. If we take them, he will come himself, and to come himself is to die himself." Baroni's face hardened. He set down the cigar. "Children," he said flatly. "We do not touch children." Lorenzo smiled with the corners of his mouth only. "We do not touch them. We use them as bait. When the business is finished, they go home." There was something in Lorenzo's eyes that Baroni did not believe. There are men who are born to betray, and after enough years of watching them, another old hand learns to recognize the look on their faces. Barone recognized it now. But the profit was already counted, and the war was already old, and he chose to let the small doubt sit unspoken between them. The plan was set in 10 minutes. The strike would come within 2 weeks, timed to a moment when Alessandro was on a distant trip. Lorenzo would disable the mansion's camera network from the inside. Barone would supply 4 men, disciplined and quiet. No one else would know. Before Lorenzo left, Barone leaned forward on his forearms. "Do you really hate him that much, DeLuca? After all those years?" Lorenzo turned his head slowly toward the warehouse window, where the darkness beyond the glass swallowed everything the light could not reach. His voice, when it came, was almost quiet enough to be tender. 15 years I have served him. 15 years I have watched him kill men without ever staining his own hands. Now he is laughing with the housekeeper's daughter, and I am still the dog at his feet. I do not hate him. I am only tired." He walked back to the BMW and slid behind the wheel. Under the overhead light, a dark stain showed faintly on the cuff of his gray shirt, dried blood, from a purging the previous month that Alessandro had ordered him to lead. He had never washed the shirt. 3 days passed. Sophia had recovered fully, the color returned to her cheeks, the tremor gone from her hands. That morning she rose before the sun, pulled her hair back into its familiar low knot, and reached for the folded apron on the small chair by her cottage door. Her old schedule waited for her like a familiar coat. Mop the marble floors, wash the linens, prepare the meals for the boss. She knew this rhythm the way a musician knows a lullaby. Alessandro found her in the laundry room. It was the same room where everything had begun. He stood in the doorway for a long moment before she noticed him. When she turned, her eyes dropped to the floor by old reflex, the reflex of 3 years of invisibility. "What are you doing, Sophia?" "I am returning to work, sir," she said quietly. "I am fully recovered. You have been very kind. Too kind. It is time I earn my keep again." He stepped into the room and, without ceremony, took the folded apron gently from her hands. "You will not call me sir any longer. Call me Alessandro, or Ale. Emma calls me that already. It is time you did the same." Sophia stammered. The words felt foreign in her mouth, forbidden even. Alessandro continued, his voice soft but very certain. "From today, you are no longer the housekeeper. You are the household manager. You will oversee the staff. You will not scrub floors. There are others for that. You will read to Emma. You will walk with her in the rose garden when the gardeners finish. You will teach her the alphabet. You will eat at the table with me, not alone in the kitchen. This is not charity. This is the correction of an error that has stood too long in this house." Sophia burst into tears. Not tears of sorrow, tears of shock. All her life she had been the woman no one saw. Her husband had left before Emma was born. Her family in Naples had cut her off when she chose to carry the pregnancy alone. All she had was work. 3 quiet years inside a Mafia mansion, where she had learned to move like a shadow through other people's lives. She did not know what it felt like to be seen this clearly. Alessandro did not embrace her. He had not embraced anyone since his mother's funeral 27 years ago. But he placed his hand gently on her shoulder, and it stayed there. "Sophia, you owe me nothing. The child taught me. Now I am giving to you both what you have deserved for a long time." Emma ran into the laundry room, saw her mother crying, and immediately wrapped her small arms around Sophia's legs, her face crumpling with worry. "Mama, why crying? I'll make Mama sad?" Alessandro crouched down and lifted the child gently into his arms. "No, Angel. Mama is happy. There is a kind of tears that comes when we are happy. Do you know that?" Emma nodded with great authority. "Yes. Mama say happy tears is when heart too full and spill out." Alessandro went very still. He looked at Sophia over the crown of the child's dark curls, and inside his own chest, he felt his heart, too, full to the point of spilling over. Late that night, Emma slept in the small bedroom that had been prepared for her that same week, a room with dark blue wallpaper printed with silver stars, and a low bookshelf already full of fairy tales. Sophia had tucked her in earlier, kissed her forehead, and whispered a small Neapolitan lullaby against her curls. The child had drifted off with Bella clutched against her chest. Alessandro found Sophia in the sitting room afterward. He asked, quietly, if she would sit with him a while on the back veranda. She hesitated only a heartbeat before nodding. The veranda faced the eastern garden. Outside, in the moonlight, the newly replanted rose bushes had begun to send up small green shoots, promises of a bloom that was still weeks away. The air smelled of turned earth and the far salt of the harbor. Alessandro poured 2 glasses of red wine. Sophia had never once shared a drink with a man in this house. In any house. But he was no longer the man in charge of her paycheck. He was something she did not yet have a word for. He spoke first, and what he said he had never said to any living person in 27 years. "I was 11 years old when my mother was shot dead. In our kitchen, I was sitting on the high stool, eating cereal. Her killers were men of the Bianchi family. My father took his revenge, all of it, the way men in this world take revenge. 4 years later, my father also died, in a prison cell, of a heart attack that was very convenient for a great many people. I was 15. Lorenzo found me 2 weeks later on a fire escape. He taught me everything I know about this work. I became the man I had to become, because there was no one else left for me to become." Sophia listened. She did not flinch. She did not judge. Alessandro's voice went lower. "I have killed men, Sophia, not many, but enough that I do not sleep well. I have ordered many more killed than I have killed with my own hand. This is the truth of my life. I am telling you because you deserve to know." Before he stopped, he could not finish. Sophia reached across the small table between them and rested her hand lightly on his. "Before what?" Alessandro looked at her. In the warm yellow glow of the veranda lantern, she was not the housekeeper. She was not an employee. She was a woman, and she was looking back at him. "Before you decide whether to stay or go, I will understand if you wish to leave. I will give you and Emma any place you want to live, a house, money enough to raise her without fear, no obligation to me, no strings." Sophia was silent for a long while. Then, softly, "Emma chose you. From the day you knelt on the laundry room floor. She does not know who you are. She does not know what work you do. She only knows a man who cried because he was worried about her mother. Children do not see the surface. Children see the heart. If Emma has chosen you, I trust her." Alessandro looked at her for a long time. He did not speak. But that night, for the first time in 13 years, he slept without dreaming of blood. 3 days later, Lorenzo returned to the mansion. He wore the same warm smile, the same heavy gold Rolex on the same measured wrist. This time, however, he carried an iPad tucked beneath his arm. On its screen waited a set of falsified quarterly reports, precisely constructed to occupy Alessandro's attention for the better part of an hour. They sat together in the study. Alessandro leaned over the numbers, frowning at margins, tapping his pen against a shipping figure that did not add up. He was focused. He was distracted. He was exactly where Lorenzo wanted him. While Alessandro read, Lorenzo watched. He watched the corners of the ceiling and counted the small black domes of the cameras. He watched through the tall window as the head of the security detail changed shifts precisely at the top of the hour. He noted which side door still bore the old iron lock rather than the new electronic keypad. He measured, with the internal ruler of a man who had cased many houses in his younger years, the distance from the cottage across the garden to the service entrance at the back of the main house. 20 paces. He measured the response time of the guards if a noise were to be raised at that hour. 40 seconds. It would be enough. Beyond the window, Sophia was leading Emma out to the rose garden. The child was skipping, holding her mother's hand, pointing at the small green buds beginning to open along the new bushes. Lorenzo watched them the way a hawk watches two rabbits crossing an open field. When the meeting closed, he adjusted his cuffs and, with careful casualness, remarked upon the coming week. "Anything on your calendar I should know about, Ale?" Alessandro closed the tablet without suspicion. 2 days in Boston. The Costa family, Tuesday and Wednesday. Lorenzo nodded, filing the days into memory with the small, cold precision of a locksmith turning a tumbler. Those 2 days would be the window. That night, in the abandoned warehouse in Brooklyn, Lorenzo delivered the details to Vincenzo Baroni. 4 men would enter at first light on Tuesday, the hour the guards were dullest. They would take Sophia and Emma without noise. They would drive them to an old cargo storehouse in New Jersey, deep inside territory Barone controlled, and then they would wait for Alessandro to come to them, as he inevitably would. When he arrived, he would be shot at the door. No negotiation, no conversation, no chance. But Lorenzo carried a private plan Baroni did not know. After Alessandro was dead, Lorenzo would kill Sophia and Emma too. He would deliver all 3 bodies to a scene the police could interpret as an internal Moretti revolt. He would rise as the man who avenged the family and restored its order. Barone would receive the promised territory. There would be no witnesses. There would be no thread anyone could pull. On the way back to his car, Lorenzo passed the eastern rose garden. In the moonlight, the very first blossom of the new planting had opened, small and pale and defiant. He stopped. He plucked it between 2 fingers, dropped it to the ground, and crushed it slowly beneath the polished sole of his shoe. "Romance kills men," he said softly into the dark. "Alessandro Moretti has forgotten that." The following morning, Emma fell in the garden. She had been chasing a small blue butterfly along the gravel path when her foot caught a raised stone, and she pitched forward hard onto her knee. She did not cry loudly. That was the instinct of a fatherless child, the instinct of a girl who had learned very young that a mother already carrying too much could not be given more weight. But tears filled her eyes, and a small ragged hiccup escaped her throat. Sophia was in the kitchen, elbow deep in a stew. Alessandro was in the eastern garden, quietly overseeing the gardeners as they set the last of the new rose bushes. He heard the small hitching sound before he heard the child's voice. He turned and saw her sitting on the gravel, holding her knee, blood already seeping between her small fingers. He was across the garden in 7 strides. He lifted her up against his chest without a word, and she buried her face into the collar of his shirt. He carried her into the house and up to the small bathroom nearest the sunroom. He set her carefully on the wide edge of the marble sink. He had never cleaned a child's wound in his life. He opened the medicine cabinet with a hand that was, to his own surprise, trembling. He drew out a small square of cotton, a bottle of antiseptic, and a strip of adhesive bandages printed with tiny brown bears. He had ordered the bear bandages himself the week before, and had not yet told anyone why. He dabbed the knee gently. Emma scrunched her face at the sting of the antiseptic. Alessandro leaned down and blew softly on the small scrape. 3 quick puffs of air. It was a trick he had not consciously remembered, but which surfaced from somewhere very old. From a summer afternoon when he was 9 and his mother had knelt in exactly this same posture over a scraped elbow of his own. Emma giggled through the sting. Sophia appeared in the bathroom doorway, drawn by the small laugh. She stopped. She did not dare break the moment. Alessandro peeled a bear bandage and pressed it carefully over the scrape. Emma looked down at the tiny brown bear, delighted, the pain instantly forgotten. She looked back up at him with her enormous brown eyes. "Thank you, Papa Ale." The room went still. Alessandro could not breathe. "Papa Ale, Papa, Father." Emma did not fully understand what she had just said. She had heard the word somewhere, perhaps in a fairy tale, perhaps by simple instinct. Sophia lifted a hand to her mouth. Her eyes filled. Alessandro looked at the child for a long moment. Then, gently, he drew her against his chest and held her there. He did not weep. He had already wept out all the tears he owned, on the wet floor of the laundry room, but inside his ribs, something closed itself into a whole shape. He did not say, "Do not call me that." He did not say, "Your father is somewhere else." He only said, very softly, "Yes, Angel. Papa is here." Sophia turned into the kitchen and pressed her back against the refrigerator, both hands over her mouth, weeping in silence. That night, Alessandro rewrote his will. Everything he owned, split cleanly in 2. half to Sophia, half to Emma, no exceptions. Sunday came warm and gold. Alessandro would fly to Boston at dawn on Tuesday, 2 days away. Before he left, he wanted a single, quiet afternoon. Sophia spread an old quilt across the grass at the heart of the eastern rose garden, where the new blossoms had begun to open in slow, careful red. Emma set up what she called her animal school. 6 stuffed animals arranged in a neat, crooked line on the quilt, each seated at attention. Bella, the soft cloth doll with the fraying corner, was granted the place of honor at the front of the class. Alessandro lay on his back on the quilt, with one arm folded beneath his head. With his free hand he reached above him, plucked a single red rose from the nearest bush, and tucked it, without a word, behind Sophia's ear where she sat beside him. She flushed the color of the flower itself. He smiled. It was a smile he had not worn in 20 years. Bruno, the old golden retriever, lay on his side beside Emma, patient as a mountain, tolerating the paper crown she had folded and set upon his gray head. Alessandro turned his eyes to the child. "Teacher Emma, what is today's lesson?" Emma drew herself up with great solemnity. "Today we learn love. Lesson 1, love Mama. Lesson 2, love Papa. Lesson 3, love Bruno. Lesson 4, love roses." Alessandro laughed. Sophia laughed with him, but something inside Sophia's chest did not fully laugh. She thought of Lorenzo. She thought of the way his eyes had passed over Emma the previous week. Warm on the surface, dry underneath. She could not name what she felt, only that a mother's instinct, older than language, older than reason, was whispering something to her. She did not tell Alessandro. He carried enough already. Emma bounced across the quilt and threw her arms around Sophia's neck. "Mama, tomorrow Papa go. Papa, remember to come home?" Alessandro reached across and touched the child's small cheek. "Papa is only away 2 days. Papa will come home. Papa promises." Emma nodded, considered, then picked up Bella and held the cloth doll out solemnly to him. "Papa take Bella. Bella keep Papa safe." Alessandro accepted the soft old doll into his palm. Its cotton corners were worn thin. Its embroidered eyes had faded to gray. He did not know that this would be the last time Emma would ever wave at him from a doorway as a child who had never yet known fear. He tucked Bella carefully into the inside pocket of his suit jacket, close to his heart. That evening, while Sophia bathed Emma in the small bathroom on the 2nd floor, Alessandro stood in the hallway outside the closed door. He listened to the small splash of water and the soft rise of Sophia's voice singing an old Neapolitan lullaby, and the child's small voice trying to sing along. He did not go in. He only stood there, listening, as a man listens to something he wishes to remember for a very long time. It was the last calm night before the storm, and only Alessandro, Sophia, and Emma did not know the storm was coming. 50 kilometers away, in a quiet garage, Lorenzo checked the last round in the chamber of his lead gunman's rifle. His gold watch caught the dark and threw back cold light. Tuesday, 5 o'clock in the morning. The sky above the harbor was still the color of steel. Alessandro left the mansion for the airport. Before he went, he stepped quietly into Emma's small room, bent over her bed, and pressed a slow kiss to her forehead. She murmured something in her sleep and turned toward the warmth of him without waking. He stood there for a full breath. He reached for her without thinking and drew her against his chest, the first time he had ever embraced her. She let out a small, startled breath, then leaned her forehead against him. 2 days, he whispered. "I will hurry home." She nodded against his shirt. His black car pulled away into the pale mist, taillights fading. Sophia closed the door softly, walked back up the stairs, slid beneath her covers, and returned to sleep. 7 o'clock. 4 shadows entered through the service door at the back of the mansion. The alarm system on that door had been quietly disabled the night before by hands that knew every wire in the house. There was no sound. Sophia woke to footsteps that did not belong. The instinct of a single mother is older than fear. She was out of bed in a heartbeat, and across the hall into Emma's room before her mind had finished forming the thought. She lifted the sleeping child into her arms and carried her back to her own bedroom. She closed the door. She pressed the small panic button by the nightstand. There was no answering sound. It had been cut. Emma stirred, blinked, saw her mother's face, and began to cry. "Hush, baby," Sophia whispered, her palm gentle over the small mouth. "Hush." Her eyes swept the room for the phone. It was on the far dresser. Too far. A knock. Then a boot against the door. The frame splintered. 4 men in black, faces masked to the eyes. Sophia screamed and folded her body around Emma. The first man crossed the room in 3 steps and brought the butt of his rifle down against her temple. She dropped. She did not release the child. The second man pried Emma from her arms. He dragged both of them, mother and daughter, down the long staircase toward the kitchen. At the bottom of the stairs, old Bruno came running, his gray muzzle raised in a bark that had not sounded this loud in years. One of the men lifted a suppressed pistol and fired once. Bruno crumpled sideways against the tile. "Bruno! Bruno!" Emma shrieked. Sophia, blood dripping from her temple, tried to crawl toward her daughter. A boot caught her hard in the stomach. She curled around the pain. Rough hands stuffed both of them into a canvas sack, shoved them across a shoulder, and carried them out the back door. A black SUV waited with its engine running. They were thrown into the cargo bay. The doors slammed. The vehicle pulled away. 7:17. The whole abduction had taken 10 minutes. Inside the mansion, 2 morning shift guards lay unconscious in the pantry. Their coffee had been drugged the night before. Inside the trunk, Sophia whispered through the sack, "Mama is here. Mama is here. Mama is here." Emma gripped her mother's hand and stopped crying. Something in the 3-year-old hardened. It was the survival instinct of a child born to a woman who had survived her whole life. The SUV turned west onto the highway. Above the road, the sun was rising. 9 o'clock in the morning, Alessandro sat at a polished conference table on the 22nd floor of a Boston hotel, across from 3 men of the Costa family. His phone vibrated once against the tabletop. He glanced down. "Marco, emergency." He excused himself with a small nod and stepped into the corridor outside. "Boss." Marco's voice was low and tight, the voice of a man forcing calm through a wall of alarm. "There is a situation. Sophia and Emma are not in the mansion. Bruno has been shot. There are signs of forced entry through the service door. The 2 morning shift guards have been drugged. We are estimating a 2-hour window." Alessandro did not move. In that single suspended heartbeat, the world he had built over the last months, the small, warm world of peanut butter and lullabies and roses, stopped. And then it began to burn. He did not shout. He did not strike the wall. He only said, softly, in a voice as cold and thin as a blade drawn from ice, "Who?" Not yet confirmed, but security recovered a fingerprint from one of the coffee cups. Familiar. "Being run now." Alessandro ended the call. He walked back into the conference room, apologized once with clean brevity, and canceled every remaining meeting on the trip without explanation. Within 12 minutes, he was airborne on the private jet. He did not speak during the flight. His eyes had returned to the eyes of the man he had been 10 years ago, before Emma had taught him how to cry. His jaw was set. His breathing was slow. His hands rested motionless on his thighs. 9:55. The wheels touched down at the private airfield outside the city. A car carried him directly to the mansion. His remaining security detail was already assembled inside the study. The fingerprint match came through as he stepped through the front door. Salvatore, one of Lorenzo's own soldiers. Alessandro was not surprised. In the deepest chamber of his chest, the shape of Lorenzo's betrayal was something he had already known but had refused to look at directly. Some truths a man carries in his ribs long before he lets them reach his eyes. He summoned only 3 men. Marco, his advisor. Enzo, head of security. Rico, the finest shooter left in the organization. Lorenzo was not summoned. No one else would know. The plan was made in less than 10 minutes. Watch Lorenzo. Follow him. Let his own footsteps lead them to the place where Sophia and Emma were being held. While the surveillance team went out, Alessandro walked upstairs into Emma's room. Her small bed was still rumpled from the abduction. Bella was not on the pillow. He remembered then. Bella was in his own inside jacket pocket. He drew the small worn cloth doll out and sat down on the edge of Emma's bed, holding it in one large hand. He did not weep, but the weight in his chest was the weight of a stone that had, until this morning, felt like a heart. He walked into the master bedroom. He opened the safe. He drew out his father's old Beretta, a weapon he had not touched in 10 years. He loaded it slowly, 1 round at a time. He slid it into the holster at his hip. In the mirror, Alessandro Moretti, the boss, had returned. Not for ambition this time. For love. There is a kind of man who becomes truly dangerous only when he has something to lose. 7 o'clock in the evening. The surveillance team's radio crackled with the report Alessandro had been waiting for. Lorenzo was driving, west on the interstate, toward New Jersey. Alessandro moved with 3 of his most trusted men and 10 of his most loyal soldiers, split across 2 black SUVs. They followed at a distance no eye could catch. Lorenzo led them, without knowing, to the abandoned cargo warehouse, at the edge of the port, deep inside Vincenzo Baroni's territory. Inside the warehouse, in a small windowless room with a single overhead bulb, Sophia sat on the concrete floor with Emma cradled in her lap. Dried blood had crusted along her temple. She was rocking the child gently and singing, very softly, an old Neapolitan lullaby, the same song her own mother had once sung to her. Emma had stopped crying hours ago. She only gripped the fabric of her mother's dress and stared at nothing. The door opened. Vincenzo Barone stepped in. He looked at Sophia the way a man looks at a wounded animal in a trap. "Your husband will arrive soon," he said, "and then you will follow him where he goes." Sophia lifted her chin. Her eyes were cold. "He will kill you first." Barone laughed, a small dry sound, and closed the door. Outside, the warehouse was already surrounded. The plan was clean and quick. 3 angles of entry, 1 heartbeat apart. Enzo through the main door, Rico through the rear. Alessandro himself would go for Sophia and Emma. 9 o'clock. Gunfire cracked from the back of the warehouse. Rico had begun. In the sudden chaos of shouting men and running feet, Alessandro kicked open the small windowless door. He crossed the threshold with his father's beretta raised. Sophia looked up and saw him. Her eyes filled instantly. "Papa!" Emma screamed. Alessandro scooped the child against his left shoulder and pulled Sophia to her feet with his right. He moved them out into the hallway, but at the far end of that corridor, Barone waited with 2 soldiers, and their weapons rose in unison. Muzzle flashes lit the concrete. Alessandro pivoted, dragging both mother and child behind his own body. He returned fire, 1 clean shot dropping the first soldier. But the second man had already adjusted, and his barrel was leveled at the smallest figure in the corridor. Sophia did not think. She moved. She threw her body forward, between the muzzle and her daughter, between the muzzle and the man she had chosen. 3 rounds. 2 struck her shoulder. 1 tore into her lower abdomen. She crumpled. Alessandro made a sound that had never before left his throat. He raised the beretta. He put a single round through Barone's forehead. He fired twice more into the second soldier. Both men dropped. He fell to his knees beside her. Blood was spreading fast across the front of the pale yellow floral dress, the same soft dress she had worn the morning Lorenzo first watched her in the kitchen. Emma was screaming, her small hand pressed against her mother's cheek. "Mama! Mama! Do not sleep! Mama!" Sophia's lips moved. Blood traced the corner of her mouth. "Emma, Papa Ale, I love you. I love you." Her eyes closed. Alessandro lifted her against his chest. He carried her out. Enzo brought the SUV screaming to the door. Alessandro did not release her hand the entire drive to the hospital. Emma sobbed without pause against his shoulder, but she never once looked away from her mother's face. Dawn came pale gray over the hospital. Sophia was in surgery. The chief trauma surgeon had spoken to Alessandro in a low, careful voice, the voice doctors reserve for men whose women may or may not come back to them. She had a chance. It would be a long one. The next hours would tell. Emma had fallen asleep from pure exhaustion in the arms of a night nurse. Alessandro placed a hand gently over the child's dark curls, then stepped out into the corridor. He had not slept. He had not eaten. Sophia's blood had dried in dark handprints across the front of his shirt, and he had refused to change it. Marco found him by the elevator. Lorenzo had been intercepted at the George Washington Bridge, trying to slip out of the city under a false name. He had been taken to the private storehouse the organization kept off the books in Yonkers. Alessandro rode there in silence. Inside the storehouse, Lorenzo sat bound to a wooden chair beneath a single overhead lamp. The heavy gold Rolex still shone on his wrist. He had not been permitted to remove it. Alessandro walked in slowly and stopped in front of him. He did not speak for a long time. Lorenzo tried a smile. The smile trembled at the corners. "Ale, we can talk. This is a misunderstanding. I swear it. We can find our way to 15 years. Only 3 words." Lorenzo went silent. 15 years you stood behind me. 15 years I trusted you like a bloodfather. Why? Lorenzo lowered his gaze. When he spoke, the words came out ragged, stripped of everything smooth. "Because you became what you are. And I stayed the dog at your feet. 15 years beside you. And I had nothing of my own. Then you brought 2 outsiders through the front door, a housekeeper and her little girl, and you gave them in weeks what I could not earn in a lifetime." Alessandro looked at him. He was not angry. He was only tired. "You never understood, Lorenzo. Sophia and Emma did not take anything from you. They gave me what I did not know I needed. If you had stayed, you would have shared in it. I was going to change the organization. I was going to give you the legitimate leadership of the real estate arm. You did not wait long enough to find out." Lorenzo bowed his head. He did not beg. He knew the law. It was the law he himself had taught Alessandro. Alessandro drew the beretta. He raised it. He set the barrel against Lorenzo's forehead and held it there. His finger settled on the trigger. He stood that way for a long moment. And in that moment, he remembered Emma. He remembered her enormous brown eyes. He remembered the small voice saying, "Papa Ale." If he pulled the trigger now, he would return to the man he had been 10 years ago. He did not want Emma to grow up with that man for a father. He lowered the gun. He turned to Enzo. "Deliver him to the authorities. With every piece of evidence we have. Barone is dead. Only Lorenzo is left. Let the law finish him." Lorenzo raised his head, stunned. "You will not kill me?" Alessandro turned away. "No. Emma will not be proud of a father who kills. You will sit in a cell until you die. That is a worse punishment for you, because you hate to be invisible." He walked out of the storehouse. The sun was rising, the same sun that had risen on the morning the black SUV drove Sophia and Emma away. But this time, he was bringing them home. 3 days passed. Sophia remained in the intensive care unit, but she had crossed the worst edge. The bullets had missed every organ that would have taken her life, partly because the thick fabric of her dress had slowed them, partly because whatever force writes the endings of lives had not yet finished writing hers. Alessandro did not leave the hospital. He slept in fragments on the long vinyl bench in the waiting corridor, his suit jacket folded beneath his head. Emma slept in his arms. The child would not release his shirt for more than a few minutes at a time, not even when a kind nurse tried to coax her toward a cot in the pediatric wing. On the second afternoon, Emma tipped a paper cup of apple juice down the front of her small dress. Alessandro carried her into the men's restroom, ran the sink, and washed the stain from the fabric with his own hands. He worked patiently, the water cold against his knuckles, his fingers scrubbing the same slow way he had watched a certain 3-year-old scrub a certain white shirt. He did not think of the symmetry, he only did it. On the morning of the 4th day, Sophia opened her eyes. Alessandro was in the chair beside her bed, his hand wrapped around hers. She blinked slowly at the ceiling, then turned her head toward the warmth of him. Her lips moved. "Emma, she is fine," he said softly, "sleeping in the waiting room. The nurse is watching her. You saved her. You saved me." Sophia smiled, a small, tired smile that reached only halfway to her eyes. "Alessandro, you did not kill Lorenzo?" She asked it because she had read the answer in his face before she had left the storehouse in his arms. Alessandro shook his head. "No, because of you, because of Emma. I did not want either of you to have a man bathed in blood." Tears slipped from Sophia's eyes down into her hair. She did not have words for what she felt. Alessandro leaned forward and pressed his forehead gently against hers. He spoke as softly as a vow. "Sophia, when you threw yourself in front of that gun for me and for Emma, I understood something I have not understood in 38 years. You showed me that love is not something I am unworthy of. Love is something I have to choose to accept. I choose you. If you will allow it, I choose you and Emma, forever." She lifted her weak hand and laid it against his cheek. "You did not need to ask. I chose you the day you knelt on the laundry room floor." The door burst open. The nurse, who had been unable to hold on to Emma any longer, followed a small blur of dark curls into the room. Emma scrambled up onto the bed, careful of the tubes, and buried her small face against her mother's neck. She wept and laughed at the same time, the strange combined sound only a very young child can make. Sophia wrapped her thin arm around her daughter. Alessandro wrapped his around them both. 3 people in one hospital room. A family, the first any of them had ever known. Alessandro looked at the 2 women who were now his life. Beyond the window, the first sun of a new day was rising. He knew that his work now was not only to wait for Sophia to heal, he had to remake everything. For them, 2 months later, Sophia had healed, though the scars along her shoulder and lower belly remained. She wore them the way a soldier wears medals, quietly, without shame. Alessandro assembled what remained of the Moretti organization in the mansion's great hall, 42 men beneath the chandelier. He stood at the head of the long table and spoke without raising his voice. "This organization is changing. No more arms trafficking. No more narcotics. No more contract violence. Whoever disagrees may leave, unharmed, with a final payment. Whoever stays will work under a new law." 12 men chose to leave. They were paid and released without a shadow behind them. 30 stayed. Marco was raised to vice president of the new real estate arm. Enzo took over all security. Rico became a private advisor. Every asset was rerouted into legitimate development. 4 low-cost apartment complexes rising in Brooklyn and Queens, a scholarship fund for the children of every man on the payroll. On paper, and increasingly in truth, the Moretti family was no longer a family of crime. It was a construction company. That evening, Alessandro opened the safe in the master bedroom, laid his father's Beretta inside, and closed the door. He turned the key. He knew, without needing to speak the words aloud, that it was the last time he would ever touch that weapon. In the eastern rose garden, now in full bloom, Emma chased a small golden puppy across the grass. She had named him Bruno II. She had refused to forget the first. The following Sunday, Alessandro held a small garden party. Only the 30 who had stayed, a few old friends who had left the life long before, and Dr. Marchetti. Sophia wore a simple white dress. Emma wore pink and carried a small basket of petals, believing this was only Papa's flower party. In the middle of the afternoon, beneath an arch of roses the gardeners had raised that morning, Alessandro led Sophia forward. He was wearing the white shirt Emma had once tried to scrub clean in the laundry room, coffee stains still faintly visible at the collar. He had asked that it never be washed out. He wanted it there, in front of every witness. He lowered himself onto one knee and opened a small black velvet box. Inside lay his mother's emerald ring, the ring his father had once used to propose in a different century. Sophia Rossi, you saved me in the laundry room in September. You saved me in the warehouse corridor in November. You have saved me every day since, simply by choosing to stay. I cannot imagine a life without you and without Emma. Will you marry me? Sophia nodded through her tears. Yes, yes, yes. He slid the ring onto her finger. Emma, who did not understand what had just happened, ran between them and tugged at his sleeve. Her enormous brown eyes searched his face without fear of any watching crowd. So Papa Ale is my papa for real now? Papa forever? Alessandro lifted her into his arms and pressed his forehead to hers. Yes, Angel. Papa. Forever. Alessandro Moretti had owned everything the world measures. He had owned nothing at all until a 3-year-old girl climbed onto a wooden stool and tried to wash his shirt. Wealth is not what you can hold. Wealth is another heart that chooses you. Not for what you have, but for who you are when no one is watching. Have you ever had a small moment, an accidental meeting, that quietly rewrote the course of your life? Share your story in the comments. We read every single one. If this story touched your heart, please tap like, subscribe, and turn on the notification bell so you never miss what comes next. Thank you for staying with Alessandro, Sophia, and Emma to the very end.